Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you join us. I'm Elizabeth Doherty. I can see that I'm all reflective here. I'm Elizabeth Doherty. I'm the director of a nonprofit called Wholly H2O, and we do education on water conservation and water reuse, but in the context of watershed health specifically. And so we're doing a lot of education about the watersheds in the East Bay, and specifically about the ecosystems and how to take care of them. So, part of that is to note lots about pollinators. We've been super focused on honeybees for a bunch of years, and I'm one of them. I've got a honeybee hive right outside my window here. And I think it took us a long time to realize that in California, I think there's 4,000 native bees in different types of native bees in California.
1,600.
1,600. Okay. Oh, maybe 4,000 in the country.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. You guys know. And so I should just not say any of this and just let Tora do it. So let me do that. So in addition to hosting, sorry, I'm going to have to go in a different room. So in addition to hosting these kind of events, we're also doing watershed tours and live streams along the watersheds. And so we have a ton of events coming up related to Saucil Creek and Strawberry Creek, and a tour coming out online for Temescal Creek. And we also have a bunch of bio blitzes coming up for the City Nature Challenge. So if you go to Eventbrite, Wholly H2O, you'll find tons of events up there, and hope you'll join us. So let me introduce our awesome speaker. I'm really excited about this. People think you just plant, you plant something, it says butterfly bush. So every butterfly in the world will come to it. And what we're all realizing, and what Tora has probably known for a long time, and I also want to mention Terry Smith, who's on the line. Both of them are the co-founders of the Pollinator Posse, which has had just remarkable impact in educating people about pollinators. We're doing a lot of work. I work along with them in different projects with monarchs and pipevine swallowtail and all sorts of different pollinators, and Tora will get into that. And Tora is also the co-director at the Lake Merritt Botanical Gardens, and worked for the city of Oakland for 40 years. Is that right, for Parks and Rec?
37 for Public Works, 37 years.
Okay, Public Works. And Tora's just a complete, you'll see, she's a inspiring, wonderful, fabulous presenter and person that knows just so much. And it's great to have you all. And I'm just gonna let me say a couple other things. A bunch of you had a chance to donate if you wanted to when you were buying tickets, and I just want to thank everybody. We have about $150 that's going to go to the Pollinator Posse because of your donations, so thanks a lot for that. You can always go on to Wholly H2O or to the Pollinator Posse. Oh, you guys are still working out your donations.
Oh no, you can donate, but you got to do it through check right now, but we're working on a different way, so you can just pay by a button. So okay. Yeah, we're always taking donations.
And then Wholly H2O on our website, you can always donate that way. And in terms of questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them. We're going to leave hopefully about 10 minutes at the end to answer questions. And also we're recording. So if you don't want to be have your face on this, then fine, just click yourself off. And I'm going to ask everybody to keep your microphones off the whole entire time, unless for some reason you're asking a question. Okay. And with that, Terry, if you wouldn't mind making Tora the.
Oh no, I can just, yeah. I'm gonna start sharing my screen.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, are we ready? Can everyone see this? Can you just shake your head?
You're good.
Right. I'm Tora Rocha. I'm the co-founder of the Pollinator Posse with Terry Smith. We started the posse about 11 years ago. We're all about creating habitat. Our mission statement is creating pollinator-friendly landscaping, foster appreciation for local ecosystems through outreach and education. We hope to find a day when we have life-enhancing, thought-inspiring green spaces will grace every corner of this town and the world beyond. And we truly believe that. Our main thing is about plants and the pollinators that are attracted to them. And why are plants important? You know, everything in this planet uses plants somewhere in their life cycle. Every single thing. And plants need pollinators to reproduce. And it's like, so it's super important. It's not just like aesthetically pleasing to humans, but it's a critical component in our ecosystems and the stability of our ecosystems. And the reason we start with the pollinators is not just because we love pollinators. It's actually the bottom of the food chain, and it's all about the whole ecosystem. And that's why we focus on them. We figure if we start with the bottom of the food chain, the rest will follow. So I like to get people to concentrate on their eco footprint. How many, raise your hand if you're a gardener. I'm assuming most of you are. So I want you to start thinking differently about what you call yourself as a gardener. You're not just a gardener. You're not just a hobbyist. You're not an outdoor custodian. If you have your hands in the dirt, you're actually a steward of our local ecosystem. And I want you to start learning about how your landscape practices and how you garden is affecting those ecosystems. And that's what we focus on in the Pollinator Posse. So that's what I call your eco footprint. How are you affecting your local eco footprint by what you're planting or what you're mulching? Because every single thing you do, everything affects the local ecosystem, whether you mulch, whether you don't mulch, whether you water, whether you don't water, whether you plant native plants, whether you plant tropicals, it all is affecting our local ecosystems. And we need to change the way we look at it. I don't know if many of you knew that Lake Merritt in Oakland, California is the oldest wildlife sanctuary in the country. It was donned a sanctuary in 1870. Last year was our 150th anniversary. And look in your upper left-hand corner, that's how we landscape it. There's nothing about a habitat in this site now. This is all those lawns that you see that was planted about 11 years ago. And the rest is daylilies and some shrubs. None of that is habitat. That looks like a desert to a pollinator. It's really sad. And we need to change the way we are looking at our sanctuaries. The bottom right is the little 4 duck islands that we planted a few years back. And that's what's left of the sanctuary. Just those little tiny 4 islands in the middle of the lake. And so that's why I got motivated to start changing that and start creating pollinator habitat around the whole Lake Merritt when I was a park supervisor. I'd get calls and emails all the time about the weeds. And what I want you to do as a landscaper or a gardener is start working on the perception of what is a weed. Many people don't know that most pollinator plants, the plants that the butterflies lay their eggs on, many of them are weeds. And I'll talk about that. And so I would get these emails from people saying, how come you didn't weed this area of Lake Merritt? Or the weeds are knee high. I want you to go weed that. And then I'd get 50 emails about these weedy patches. And then I put these signs out, and the same 50 people would thank me for what I'm doing. So that's what I'm talking about, how you as a gardener in a landscape have the choice and have the chance to change the perception of weeds. And the one I like to use as an example is plantain. You guys all know plantain, that little weed that everyone gets in their lawn and then they weed it out. Well, plantain is the host plant, which is the caterpillar nursery for the local Buckeye butterfly. And so it needs plantain to lay its eggs on for that species to survive. So what I want to see people do from now on is actually weed out your lawn from your plantain patches, because we don't need lawn. We don't need fescue. We don't need that. We need plantain. Also in Chinese medicine, they use plantain as a tea for asthma. And it's also a poultice that you can use for a bee sting or a cut. So why is that considered a weed? It's a super important plant in our communities. So we need to rethink what we call weeds and what we grow in our yard. If you want to plant for pollinators and ecosystems, this is actually the best example of a diverse habitat garden. You need all these components. This is really what you want. If you don't have a large yard, then you can pick parts and components of it. But you need all of this. You need an understory and ground covers for creatures for protection from other predators. You need a water source, and usually a slow trickling water source. I'll talk about that in a minute. You need rockeries and old logs for salamanders and beetles, and places for butterflies to overwinter in. Then you need the middle story for the songbirds, and then the tall trees for the large nesting birds like the raptors. So that is actually the best version of a healthy habitat right there. You need layered vegetation and dense shrubs for serious habitat. But you can, do just versions of this. This is the California Habitat pollinator garden at the gardens at Lake Merritt that we built in honor of my mother. When my mother passed away, before she passed away, she told me she didn't want a headstone in her name, that she wanted a butterfly garden, and she wanted her grandchildren, great grandchildren to look at flowers and butterflies when they think of her instead of a piece of concrete. So we planted this garden, and $8,000 came to the garden, and we planted this. And so this is an example of what a California pollinator garden would look like. And so you see, I put the components that I was talking about. There's a thing that looks like an egg is called a seed fountain. Mariposa Garden and Designs makes those. That's a slow moving water source that birds and bees and pollinators can drink water without drowning. The cobbles I use for protection for the salamanders. Also, the native bees nest in the ground, and so they can use right underneath the cobbles to get a good spot to protect their nest from being tilled or dug or attacked by predators. You can see the seed fountain again, and then the picture, you can see a robin at the top getting some water, and also a monarch about to land on it. Every single day that this water feature is running, you will see creatures on it. It's just so well used. So it's really important to have a good water source in your habitat garden. So it's not just the plants, it's how you put the plants together with these other features that make a difference. In this picture, you'll see Mimulus and Fragaria, grasses. This is Carex panza and poppies and salvias. In the background is ribes. This is a good mix. It's really important to have grasses for skippers. A lot of people forget about that. If you have just grass that is your lawn and you mow it, you're going to wipe out a whole generation of skippers. So it's important to have bunch grasses in your habitat gardens. This is another way to plant for habitat. This is what we originally called the bee hotel. I put in when I realized when I had the epiphany to start the Pollinator Posse, is we were removing deadwood and trees because we had branches falling and almost hurting people. And I learned about native bees and how they use dead wood and trees to nest. So like Elizabeth was saying, that we have 1,600 native bees in California. 30% of them are wood cavity nesters. They don't create a hive. It's a single female. And she's looking for beetle hole or woodpecker holes in deadwood. Well, as a park supervisor, I had to remove the deadwood to make it safe for humans. So this is how I gave back to the native bees, is to create this bee hotel. And then one day we had Airbnb employees in the garden volunteering, and they kind of gave me a lecture about how they don't use they don't use hotels. And that's when it dawned on me to call it the Airbnb. So you can put a small version of this. We learned later that having a large version is not so good because all the predators can go to one spot to get the little mason bees. A lot of parasitic wasps love to eat the larva of the native bees, so we want to protect them and make small Airbnbs throughout your yard. And if you do it, you can just take a log and drill holes and hang it in a place where it's protected and have it face south. You don't want it to have the hottest sun of the day. And location is everything. You want to put it near the nectar sources that these native bees will use. Kate Frey is a really awesome bee gardener and landscape designer, and she will tell you that masses of plants are what is going to attract pollinators, not to have just one different variety of everything in your yard, but to have masses. If you only have a small garden, just have like 3 of the same species, and that will help attract the pollinators. This is her cornerstone. Down on the bottom is her cornerstone garden out in Sonoma. You can see some great examples of pollinator gardens. If you want to have plant lists, at the end of this talk, I'm going to show you how to go onto Calscape, put your zip code in, but this is on our website on pollinatorposse.org. I wanted to make it gardener friendly. So this is a list of plants that attract pollinators, but it's in a spreadsheet where it's the months that they bloom and the color that they bloom. So it's really easy to use to design your yard. If you're in temperate climates, like the Bay Area or Southern California, we have pollinators year round. So you want 360 days of pollen and nectar, especially nectar if you're in the coastal areas where the monarchs come in the winter. It's super important to have winter blooming nectar for them, and not so focus on milkweed, but to focus on getting winter nectar. So you want to look on this chart under October through February, things that bloom and have nectar for the pollinators. That would be super important if you're in coastal California. These are some of my favorite California native plants. If you want a good pollinator garden, I say you have to have at least 70% natives for your area to attract the local pollinators. But I also use about 30% of non-natives, mostly Mediterranean gardens, because a lot of them do bloom in the winter when our natives aren't, and they are giving the nectar to the honeybees and to the monarchs. People have to remember honeybees are not native to California. They're from Europe. And if we have warm climate, they're going to be out looking for pollen and nectar. So you need it in the wintertime when our native bees are really dormant. Only the queen bumblebees will be out in the winter, and they're going to need some nectar too to eat, to forage on, so they can bring it back to get ready to create their nests in the ground. So these are some of my favorites. Phacelia, the one on the upper left. Phacelia, Phacelia, Phacelia. You'll hear me talk about that plant over and over today. Please plant Phacelias. That's the bee plant. Like Mardondella, bee balm, and Phacelias are the 2 bee plants that are just over the top. Bumblebees love Phacelias. Up in the right hand corner is Erigeron Wayne Roderick. That's another one of my go-to plants. And you can look at that picture. You can see 3 pollinators right on that one plant. And that was just one snapshot for a minute in one day. But so you can imagine how many pollinators that Erigeron Wayne Roderick tracks. That's a leafcutter bee up in the right-hand corner. And then those are 2 fiery skippers. Fiery skippers are the ones I talked about that lay their eggs on grasses. And that's why we don't see them so much, because the grasses we had prevalent everywhere were grasses that had to be mowed. So if you put a non-mowing lawn, the native no-mow lawns, you'll see a big difference in your skipper populations. Or Carex panza, they really love the tender poa species. That's their favorite. And right now they actually love Bermuda, unfortunately, and Aharta, the non-native grasses. But if we can add more, it'll help them. In the bottom right, poppies, poppies, poppies. Never go wrong with poppies. That's a little sweat bee in there. And then on the left, on the bottom, is the narrow leaf milkweed. We don't just plant milkweed for the monarchs. Every pollinator loves the milkweed, the blooms. So it can't go wrong with planting milkweed. This is the narrow leaf. That's Asclepias spicularis, and with a honeybee on it. And all the salvia, the California salvias, you cannot lose. Please plant them. They are big, big pollinator attractors. This is the carpenter bee on, I think that's Clevelandii. And then the other one is the hummingbird sage on the right side. Those are two really good ones. The Salvia sonomanensis is another one of my favorite ones. It's a low ground cover sage that really attracts bees. Verbenas. This is Bonariensis, the non-native verbena that you have to have verbena in your yard if you really want pollinators. Verbena Elysifolia delamina is one of my absolute all-time favorite pollinator plants. It blooms 365 days of the year. It's a California native. It's an important winter blooming plant for the monarchs. We have it in our garden in Lake Merritt, and it blooms literally 365 days of the year. It's one of my absolute favorite plants. So Verbena Elysifolia. This one here is Bonariensis. It's an annual. You have to keep planting it, but it does reseed. But as you see, the bees absolutely love it. Butterflies love it. When the painted ladies are flying through and migratory, you'll find them all on your verbena. Ceanothus is another must-have in your garden. It's a host plant for many different butterflies, but it's a nectar source for everyone. Our local Habropoda depressa, this local digger bee here in the Bay Area, it's linked to this plant. So when the Ceanothus bloom is when it comes out of its nesting sites in the ground. It's that very fast teddy bear bee that you'll see. So Ceanothus, that's Dark Star on your right-hand side, and the left-hand side is Julia Phelps. It all depends on your space. You have to, assess your space, what Ceanothus you're going to get, because some are very large and then others are prostrate and low growing. So it depends on your space. This is Tajiti's Limoni, which is Mexican marigold, which is a non-native to California, but it's native to Mexico. But it blooms 365 days of the year too, and is a valuable winter bloomer to put in your garden. And it's deer resistant. It's very fragrant foliage, so the deer don't eat it. It gets about 3-4 feet tall. I think it's a must-have in your garden if you have the space. Tithonia, there's another non-native. People will hear me talk about Tithonia over and over and over, to the point now that when people have extra Tithonia seeds, or even nurseries have extra Tithonia, they call me because they know that I will make sure it gets in the ground. This is the power plant in your pollinator garden. It's an annual. It's multi-stemmed. It's kind of a small shrub, but it's actually an annual flower, and it will attract pollinators of all kinds. I always joke that I swear monarchs can see this from space, because I never had monarchs in our garden until I planted this with milkweed, and then we started getting monarchs at the gardens at Lake Merritt. But please plant this. It is a powerhouse plant. Hummingbirds love it. This hummingbird was threatening me to get away from its flower because it's very, very territorial over the Tithonia in a garden. Clarkias are another one, another annual plant that you need to plant. Clarkias, as you see, their little native bees will curl up in there and just get all kinds of pollen. They will attract so many different pollinators in your garden. You can't go wrong with Clarkias. Just plant any Clarkia you can get that fits your space. Here's another Clarkia. This Clarkia gets about 4 feet tall. And this is an Osmia, and little local native bee up here in the Sierras, called Osmium Lignaria. It's bright green, and they're blue and green depending on the sex that they are, but they're gorgeous. They're tiny little bees. And we planted a hedgerow of these Clarkias and Lupin this year, and it was just buzzing with native bees. Phacilias again. Here I go again. Please, 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 please plant phacilias. They're the ultimate bee plant. And there's annuals and there's perennials of them. I like to put at least 5 different phacilias in our garden so that it covers the different seasons. Please plant phacilias. Lupin is another one. Lupin is a host plant for many blues and some hair streaks. And I'm sorry if I keep saying host plant and people don't. Host plant is the butterfly, is the plant that a butterfly will use to lay its eggs on. And each butterfly has its own family of plants that it lays its eggs on. And that's what we call a host plant because it's hosting the caterpillars. So lupin is a host plant for blues and hair streaks and some moths. And you can't go wrong with lupin. And you can see this is a leafcutter bee and they're love the blossoms. Milkweed communities, like I said before, everything's attracted to the flowers of milkweed. So please plant milkweed. The monarchs are in desperate need of it right now in California. We're on the verge of collapse, and so you can't lose by planting. This is again the narrow leaf milkweed that's native to most of California. And no matter where you are in California, it's probably native to your area. It's just the least amount of leaf space. So you got to plant a lot of it. And it's a great plant. It grows by rhizomes. So it takes a while to get established, but it's easy to grow from seed versus the showy milkweed. Much easier to grow by seed. Eriogonums. It's another powerhouse plant. This is the buckwheats, California buckwheats. This is the sulfur buckwheat. That's a hair streak on it. It's also one of the power host plants. I think it has 24 different butterflies that use this and moths. So it's 24 different species use this as all the different buckwheats as a host plant. So you can't go wrong. The naked buckwheat, the pink buckwheat, any of the buckwheats. This is just one of my favorites, the sulfur. It's very low growing, easy to handle. But like I said, it's a must have if you want pollinators. Poppies, please plant poppies. The bees adore them. It's so fun to watch the big giant bumblebees get in them and make them lay over and then pop up when they come out of it. But you just can't lose by planting poppies. But the number one plant for Lepidoptera, according to Xerxes and Doug Ptolemy, is oaks. If you can only plant one plant in your for a pollinator garden, plant an oak. There are many species of pollinators that use oaks and also moths. And like I said before, the pollinators are the bottom of the food chain. So you get those tent moths or the oak moths. Don't spray your oaks when you get that. It'll defoliate your oak, but it is a huge food for our songbirds. Most people don't know that 75% of food that the songbirds feed their fledglings is caterpillars. Did you know that? It's super critical and important for our ecosystems that we have lots and lots. They've done a study and it takes 3,000 caterpillars per fledgling to get it to its adulthood. That's a lot of caterpillars. And so when you see that oak tree full of those tent caterpillars or those oak caterpillars, that's a lot of food for songbirds. So don't think of it as, oh my God, it's an infestation, I'm going to lose my oak. No, that's a buffet. That's a buffet, and you did a good job. So please think differently about how we look at the insects. And I'm sure that you already do because you're on this webinar, but spread the word to your friends and everything else. But oaks. Knowing the life cycle. It's not just about planting the right plant, it's maintaining and how you maintain your landscapes. That's so important to keeping pollinators coming to your yard. There's a funny story with one of the joint monarch ventures that this woman had sent in to get milkweed seeds to plant milkweed to attract the monarchs to her yard and somewhere in the Midwest. And she planted all these seeds. She had milkweed growing, and then she emailed them and called and complained that she's been planting this milkweed, but she hasn't seen one monarch She just gets this worm that keeps eating the milkweed. And she's been killing these worms, but she could never stop. So it's just, it's sad and funny, but knowing the life cycle and how it works is so important. So you can't just plant to have nectar for the adult, the butterfly or the bees. You have to plant the host plant, which is going to attract the butterfly to lay eggs. And the way it usually works, like you can see in the gardens at Lake Merritt, that where we plant the milkweed, we also have nectar for the adults to nectar on, and the males will nectar on that and then hover around them. They'll just fly and circle the milkweed, knowing that the females will be coming through. So we call it the singles bar at the garden. You know, it's where the boys hang out waiting for the girls to come through. So you have to have the nectar so the males have the energy to keep circling the host plant. So you'll see the same with other species. So in this one, I'm going to use the Anise Swallowtail as an example. So you see up in the left-hand corner, the egg on the bronze fennel. I like to use bronze fennel because I think it's a really beautiful texture plant. So Anise Swallowtails use anything in the carrot family. The native California plant they like a lot is yampa, but nobody's growing that anymore. So they've converted to fennel, which is everywhere. But what happens with fennel is it grows, the Anise Swallowtail lays their eggs, and then the gardeners go in there and weed eat it down and wiped out that whole generation. So if you have fennel, all you have to do if you don't want it to spread is just cut it, put it in a 5-gallon bucket and let it just sit. It'll give those caterpillars time to go through their life cycle and then crawl off and go to chrysalis. And then once it's brown and dead, then you can throw it in your compost. But please, just think about the whole life cycle. So there's the egg up in the top left. There's the caterpillar. It's about the third instar on the right upper hand corner. They go through 6 in different sheddings of their skin, which is actually their exoskeleton, and change colors. And on the bottom right left-hand corner is a caterpillar that's about to go to chrysalis, and there's a dime for reference. You can see how big that caterpillar gets. And that caterpillar will go from that egg to that size in 18 days if the weather is permitting. It's a very fast process. But if you look at that, think about the songbirds again. Look at how much big old hunk of protein that is for a little fledgling, right? So they say that in the nature, a caterpillar will lay 400 eggs, maybe one will make it to a butterfly. So that's why we need them to have more host plants so they can plant, so they can lay more eggs so that they have a chance to make it to adulthood. So on the right-hand bottom corner is that same caterpillar going into chrysalis. It will use a silk thread and tie itself to a stick. And then it turns into this chrysalis, which is on the right-hand side. So what I was saying about maintaining, so if you have host plants in your garden, which are where the eggs are laid, the most of the butterflies or the caterpillars don't go to chrysalis on their host plants. They will crawl off and find a sturdier shrub nearby to go to chrysalis. So if you're over pruning your shrubs that are in your habitat garden, you're probably pruning off this little dead leaf looking thing. So you're wiping out the end of the life cycle. So when I talk about habitat gardens, the really most critical component besides what you plant is how you maintain it. And basically, you shouldn't prune it. You should leave it alone. Nature worked all by itself before we got our hands on it. And when you over manicure your yards, you're probably wiping out most of the pupa stage of pollinators. So please don't over prune your plants. Let them go to seed for the songbirds. Let them stay big and healthy for the pollinators to go through their life cycle. Another important thing to know about maintaining is not raking your leaves. Like the hair streaks will climb, there are mallow is their host plants. So cheeseweed or native mallows, but they drop when they're a caterpillar, when they go to chrysalis, they will free fall to the ground, wrap themselves up in a leaf and wait out the winter. So if you're raking your leaves and putting it in your compost bin, you're wiping out all those hair streaks. And think about what leaf matter is. it turns into compost. So just rake your leaves under your shrubs. Don't rake them and throw them in your compost. Because really, if you just like to rake your leaves, put them in your green waste bins and roll them out to the street, then run out to the store and buy compost, you just like to spend money. Because basically you could just rake it under your shrubs, sprinkle a little compost on those leaves, and then you're going to have next year's compost. So just save yourself some money and save some generations of pollinators by not raking your leaves. So do you see this whole kind of flavor I have about just really just gentle gardening? The lazy gardeners love me because I tell them not to prune, not to rake their leaves and everything. But really, it's not about it's about not over manicuring. If you like a neat and tidy yard, you're not going to like a habitat garden. But you can have both. You can have a neat and tidy garden right around your house and then leave the area near your fence line that for the habitat, and then you just leave it be, because the native bees need bare dirt and dead wood to nest. So you don't want to over mulch. Just like I said, everything you do affects the landscape. So not over mulching. Do not use weed cloth because it suppresses a lot of things. The native bees can't nest. The worms can't do their job by getting to the leaf matter to do the decomposing. If you're going to want to cover your soil, do it with cardboard because the worms and the bees can get through that. Here's another example of a chrysalis that would be for the monarchs. When it first goes into chrysalis, it looks like this green thing on your left. And then the night before it comes out, a butterfly, it will look like that on the right, but that's only about an inch long. So would you notice that if you were pruning your yard? Probably not. They never hardly ever go to chrysalis on the milkweed. They will climb off and crawl on a fence, like under the under railing of a fence or on a building or on a bigger shrub like a tree. We had milkweed around a pineapple sage in the garden one year, and my gardener wanted to prune the sage, and it was right after the monarchs had come in, and I said, if you prune that, you have to look at every single branch before you put it in the compost. So one shrub she pruned and she found 18 chrysalis on one sage. So it just shows you that you have to pay attention. Here's a few of our local butterflies here in the Bay Area. Its upper left-hand corner is a tiger swallowtail. That's host plant is sycamore trees and willows. So you probably never see caterpillars because they're the top of the crown in a sycamore tree. The one on the upper right is the hair streak that I was talking about. This is a Cape mallow flower. This is what they lay. They lay their eggs in the blossom in the bud of a mallow, and then they will free fall, like I said, to the ground and wrap themselves up in a leaf, waiting out the winter. On the bottom left-hand corner is our red admiral, and their host plant is stinging nettle. How many of you are out there actively planting stinging nettle? Probably not. But do you see what I'm talking about, how most of the host plants are weeds? So we have to pay attention and reclassify what is a weed. Stinging nettle is a really good tea. It's an herbal tincture for a lot of people. You just have to learn how to grow it. They also have started laying eggs on pellitory, which is an awful weed in the Bay Area, but it's actually a wonderful weed in the Bay Area because it's the host plant for the red admiral. So you got to start thinking about your weeds and directing your attention on what is a weed. And then in the middle is the buckeye butterfly. I talked about the plantain. So please weed out your lawn and leave the plantain for that beautiful buckeye butterfly in the middle there. And the one on the bottom right is a checkered skipper. Like I said about the skippers, they use grasses. So if you're mowing all your lawns and don't have any bunch grasses, you're not going to have skippers. The pipeline swallowtail is a project that we're working on with the Pollinator Posse as a special project to bring them back to the flatlands of Oakland. They've been extinct in Oakland and the flatlands for years, probably 30 years, because no one's planting the Dutchman's pipe, California. So it's Aristolochia californica, which is a very cool plant. It is a very beautiful flower. Butterfly, sorry about that. The males have that iridescent blue, and on the underwings, you'll see those orange spots. They lay their eggs in clusters, and they do everything in clusters. They're super fun butterflies. And that's their caterpillars on the right-hand side. Terry Smith is like one of the leaders in this project. And we have brought back within, I think it's Terry's like an 8-year project. How long have we been working on this? She's muted.
Hey, let me unmute. Yeah, my plant's at least 8 years old.
Yeah. So
and then we've had now caterpillars for 3 years.
So we actively have brought the Pollinators project has gotten pipevine swallowtails back to the flatlands, but we need more people to do that. We need people to plant Aristolochia. It's super slow growing. And Terry's plant has more caterpillars than it can actually feed. So we usually have to find homes for the caterpillars so we share them. If you have a large pipevine, please contact us. You can look us up, either pollinatorposse.org or follow our Facebook group, because we'll announce it when we have extra caterpillars that need homes and you have pipevine. But I want to tell people that if you have a new plant and you have like a 3-foot length vine, you do not have enough food for caterpillar. These caterpillars are voracious. They will eat a whole vine. You need to have a pretty adult, mature vine to be enough food for some pipevine caterpillars. But if you do,
they also eat a lot longer. People who are used to monarchs eating for 3 or 4 weeks, these guys go 6, and they're like 2 weeks in that teenage unfillable stage. So you need some fodder.
Yeah. So follow us on our Facebook group if you're interested and you have a pipevine. But we really want to bring this caterpillar and butterfly back to the Bay Area. Painted Ladies, their host plant is mallows or hollyhocks or any of the mallow family. They are the other migratory butterfly. And like, I think it was 2 years ago, we had that giant migration because there was all the rains in the desert near Mexico, and it was fabulous to see thousands and thousands. You usually see them in the springtime, and they really are attracted to that verbena, and you can see it up in that left-hand corner again.
Terry, Tora, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. It's Elizabeth, to say that I was in Anza Borrego 2 years ago while they were pupating or it's going into caterpillar phase, I should say. And there were literally, you couldn't take a step anywhere without stepping on one.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Gazillions of them. I have awesome pictures up of them.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And so these are the kind of things that you can do to bring the pollinators into your yard. Our next event that we're going to have with the Pollinator Posse, and if you want to help, is I created a way. I wanted to get people to start thinking about fun ways to help create pollinator habitat. And one of my big pet peeves is golf courses and how they're heavy polluters. So I wanted people to start pressuring golf courses about going organic and doing the right thing. So I created this event called Teas for Bees, where we have kids hit seed balls into the open space at golf courses with golf clubs. And now it's a pretty big hit, and we're going to do 5 different golf courses. The latest golf course that we are doing in Redwood Canyon in Castro Valley now is getting Audubon certified. They've stopped using pesticides. Now they're becoming critical habitat for songbirds and pollinators. And think about the space that golf courses have and how we can make a difference. So we're going to have, this is one of our first year posters. We're going to do it in May 3rd and probably May 15th in the Bay Area. So it's another way you can help. We need people to make seed balls because in order to make seed balls that don't implode on impact with a golf club, we have to make our own recipe. It's a fun way to get people to start talking about habitat. This is the kids. They made seed balls that day also, and they were so huge that they were throwing them instead of hitting them with golf clubs. And thank you for listening. We'll take a question and answer if you want to get involved. This is our website, pollinatorposse.org. Terry and I answer all the emails on that. That's the way you can get a hold of us. And then I am also going to show you how you can go to Cowscape right now. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and share my other screen. So you're going to go to Cowscape and you put in your zip code. This is my zip code. And it'll give you a list of plants for your area that are native. So these are only going to be your native plants. And like I said before, 70% should be natives. So you can go to any one of these. And let me go to coffeeberry. You click on coffeeberry, and then it'll show you pictures of the coffeeberry. But down here, if you scroll down, it tells you wildlife supported. These are the host plants. These are the pollinators that plant is a host plant for. So like the pale swallowtail, the coffeeberry is the host plant for the pale swallowtail. So this is a great tool for you because people always want me to give them a list, but it all depends on your microclimate. It's your climate where you live. So this is an easier way for you to help come up with that list. And like I said, you can go to our website, go to resources, and you'll see our plant list, and it'll have that spreadsheet I showed you before. So go to Cowscape, put in your zip code, and then you will get this whole list, and you can see all these different plants, and each one of them, not everyone will be a host plant or not, but most of them will. Let's see what Canyon Live Oak gives us. Like I said, oaks are a great plant. Look at all the different pollinators. The Western Tiger Swallowtail, the California Sister, which I actively have in my yard all the time. The Golden Hair Streak, the moths that are going to be critical habitat for songbirds. So you can't go wrong with these live oaks. But this is a fun little tool to go through and find out here's Lupin. Like I said, let's plant Lupin. You go down here, it's painted ladies, gray hair streak, blues, blue, the sulfur, another blue. So I like to pick out, plants that get the most bang for my buck. And so that's the buckwheats and the lupins. You get a lot of different pollinators that are host plants. That's a host plant for. So I wanted to make sure that I walked you through using Cowscape. It's a fabulous tool that they've created, and they've put a lot of research and time into this. So it really is a nice thing to be able to use. Willows is another one. Usually there's a lot of, see Western Tiger Swallowtail, Morning Cloak, Lorquin's Admiral, Buck Moth, Tortoiseshell, Satyr, there's a lot. So that's a great, willows are great host plants too. It's another kind of oak. So those are my favorite plants. So I will turn this over to the question and answer. Thank you for listening. I hope I inspired you to want to be what? You're not just a gardener. You are a steward of your local ecosystem, and you're an important part of this community. What you do is so important for our ecosystems. So please pat yourself on the back for wanting to do this and to be here, because it's super important for us for the future. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Yippee. That was awesome, power-packed information. I learned so much personally. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have a bunch of questions, and we'll see how many we can get to, but there were a couple of questions about whether or not people should have birdhouses. Martin, do you mind turning your sound off so we can get Tora on here? No problem, don't worry about it. So what do you think about birdhouses, Tora?
Birdhouses are great. It's always good to go to like Audubon and get the right dimensions and the sizes and the exposure. Like the bluebirds, the Western bluebird actually, because they had this recovery project and get people to plant, to put birdhouses out for bluebirds, that they've recovered so well that now the bluebird recovery program is looking at other songbirds. But the bluebird boxes work really well, and knowing where to place them, they like to be in like an open meadow. So you put them on the edge of a meadow and you'll get the most bang for your buck. Owl boxes are super important because we need it for rodent care, especially, you know, if you're out in the open spaces. And also what I learned about bumblebees is they love to use old birdhouses. They're attracted to old birdhouses for their hives. They're one of the only native bee that creates a hive. Usually they'll use the bottom, like an old burrow in a hole at the base of a trunk of a tree, but they're really attracted to the old nesting material that birds have left in old nesting boxes. So UC Davis, their bumblebee project, they actually just use old birdhouses and get nesting materials and put in there from other old used birdhouses. So yes, please use but just check them, make sure you clean them out every so often. And make sure they can be cleaned too, because otherwise sometimes they become wasp houses. So
and just to add something about bird feeders, in this year in particular, they're asking people to take all your bird feeders down because there's an issue with salmonella. And people, I'm on Twitter and follow a lot of people that are birders, and even people that are cleaning them and bleaching them and doing all the right things are that birds are showing up. So just take your feeders down.
Yeah, salmonella is getting the finch populations really bad. So
Also, somebody asked a question about bee hotels and how to maintain them. They had heard that there were diseases spread in bee hotels.
Yes, it's the same as the birdhouses. You have to change. There's a couple birdhouse. I mean, they get chalk brood, which is a fungus. It's really important to change out the nesting material every other year to see if you have a use in it. You can tell when you see the holes have been plugged by either mud or leaf matter that they're using it. I change the logs out every other year. You can order nesting blocks from Crown Bees. So you go to crownbees.org. They have these called farm trays, and they're blocks that you can take apart and you can harvest your cocoons. Because when you open it up, you'll see that it's really fascinating. The native bees, the single moms, I call them, we have kids, Terry does this fabulous thing with little kids, teaching them about pollinators. And we talk about the solitary bees, and we have them we call them little bee condos at our outreach events. And we tell them that they're helping the single moms of the bee world, because it's true. It's just a single female doing all the work. She doesn't create a hive like a honeybee where she's got 6,000 workers doing the work. It's just her, and she'll fill up that hole. So you want the holes to be at least 6 inches deep, because what she does is she lays the egg. She'll go to the back of the hole, put a nectar and pollen ball down that she's collected, and lay an egg on it, and then seal that part of the chamber shut, and goes out and does it over and over until that whole hole is filled. But she puts all the female eggs in the back, and then she leaves the male eggs towards the front in case a predator gets in, because the female eggs are more valuable, unfortunately, for the species to carry on. So it's quite fascinating. So the bees, they all hatch in the spring or whatever, or summer, depending on the species. The first egg that was laid will chew its way out and then come through the rest and help its siblings come out, and then they all hatch together. But if one of the ones towards the front have chalk brood, then the ones in the back will get the chalk brood as they come through the different chambers. So if you harvest your cocoons and pull it out, you can pull out the healthy ones and destroy the one that has chalk brood, and you can kind of help the populations. It's a lot of work though, but not all of them get chalk brood. That's just how they're helping the native bee population. So crownbees.com or .org, can't even remember now, but Crown Bees, they sell the called farm trays. So that's an easy way, or just drill logs Yeah. Oh,
Martin's
there you
holding
go.
one up.
Martin's holding it up. Is that their new one? Isn't that? Oh, yeah, with the little drawers at the top where you harvest your eggs, the cocoons, and you put them up there, and then they'll come out on their own in the spring. Yeah, that's their newest design.
Oh, that's cool.
Pollinator Posse works closely with crown bees and them, and then you can get the pheromone in the reeds. Yeah. So yeah, no, crown bees is a great organization.
Did you say it should face south,
Yes.
Laura? Okay, that was another question.
Yeah, face south because you don't want it to be face west. You don't want the hottest sun because it can bake the little pupa. So you want south facing, and it's really important, the placement. I did bee hotels up here in Auburn at a soldier garden, which is a community garden for veterans with PTSD. And we had a two-sided fence we put them on, and the bee hotel that we put on the south facing side got we put it up in April with a high school, and by June the leafcutter bees had filled up the holes, but none of the other ones on the west side got any holes plugged. So it's very, very important, and you need it to be near the nectar sources for native bees. You know, you want it to be protected from the weather, but you really want it to be near the nectar source. And the leafcutter bees love rose leaves to use for their nesting material. So you got to have it within 300 feet of the food source and the leaf matter or the mud that they're going to use to clog the holes.
Then another question is it now the time to put up mason bees, or should we wait until after rain?
No, it's now. The mason bees are starting to come out because the ceanothus bloomed, you know, and so the almonds are blooming, the apples are blooming, the plums are blooming, all the things that they're known to pollinate are starting to bloom. So I would put them up now and put them near those trees that are pollinating. And if people don't know that, there's been tons of research, and if you are a gardener who likes to get crops, they've proven now that native bees actually will, if you use native bees to pollinate your crops, you get a 25% higher yield. And it's because they don't take the pollen back to a hive to feed their young, except for the single females. The males are just belly flopping from flower to flower and doing a much better job of actually pollinating. So if you really want a good harvest on your fruit trees, then you should convert to mason bees or leafcutter bees.
Another really good question somebody asked was, how can we create this kind of dense habitat while also being fire safe?
That's that's the $1 million question. I live in Auburn, California now, and so I am in the middle of a canyon, and we talk about that all the time. I choose a lot of ground covers that are low growing. You can put, gravel around your house within a few feet, and then, or just loose gravel that's kind of light, and the native bees can actually nest in that. And then put your nectar plants farther out. They want you to keep a fire ladder. So if you put low growing ground cover pollinator plants and then just tall trees and don't have that ladder in between, you'll have to be smarter about what kind of subshrubs you plant. It is hard. It's a hard row to hoe. I put large sprinklers out because I used to work in parks. So I have the ability to do that so that I can wet my open space down in a fire. But it is a tricky thing. I'm using a lot of non-native aloes that bloom for hummingbirds because they're succulents and so they're fire safe. So being more creative, like I said, the Cenomanensis, the sage Cenomanensis is a low growing sage instead of, say, like Clevelandii, which is a bigger subshrub that gets to be 4 feet and can be quite woody and probably like probably be pretty flammable, that we just pick and choose the lower, tighter, more succulent leafed plants. I'm going to work with a firescape. We're going to come up with a list of plants that are good for firescaping and pollinators within the next year. It's just a really hard, tricky conversation.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. And then another question, and something we haven't covered yet, is where to buy your plants. Somebody was like, should I get them at Home Depot
Oh,
or?
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Right,
thank
we
you.
forgot to talk
That
about
was
that.
that was one subject that Terry's laughing at me now because it's usually that one that I pound into people. The most important thing you can do besides planting is where you plant. It is critical right now to not support nurseries that are using neonicotinoids. Xerces has got a big push right now, educating people how to talk to nurseries, because when they talk to nurseries, the nurseries tell us, well, the customers don't want to buy a plant that's been eaten by an insect. They want a perfectly, perfect plant with no aphids on it or no this. But if you as a customer go in there and demand that they don't use neonics and say, no, I will buy a plant that has a little chew hole in it, it's really important. But also support your local small native nurseries that are doing it the harder way. Lowe's and Home Depot have now taken a pledge to not use neonics or sell neonic plants. So that's in the works. I like to support your local nurseries. If you're in the Bay Area, there's Plowshares, which was, going to be part of this. Support them. They're working their butt off to do it the right way. Oaktown Natives, please support her. Annie's Annuals is probably the biggest retail nursery that stopped using neonics. They do spray with BT. They have to. That's a law in the California state that if you ship your plants across state lines, you have to spray to stop the invasive pests from crossing state lines. So that just means BT, though, can be washed off and it just wears off. The ones that you want to avoid are plants that are sprayed with systemic insecticides. All the neonics are systemic, and that means it stays in the soil for 8 years, and the plants next to it can uptake it. So the retail store is taking that choice away from you. And so what my biggest fight is that these retail nurseries set up these displays saying bee and butterfly friendly, but yet they have neonics on them. So when you plant that plant, it kills the bees and the butterflies that you just spent money on getting. So that's the fight that Pollinator Posse is doing. Telling the nurseries how lying to the customers is awful and immoral, and that they need to stop this this false targeting. So support your local nurseries that are not. If you're a wholesaler, if you're a landscaper, Suncrest Nursery has not sprayed neonicotinoids for over 15 years. That's a wholesaler. We can't get an honest answer out of Devil Mountain Nursery or Green Acres. They avoid the questions. So we are working on that. Xerces will be putting out a list. We have been working with Monarch Joint Venture and Xerces Society about coming up with a list of nurseries that is safe to buy from. So but right now, if you're in the Bay Area, I know Bruce is down there in San Diego, so I can't help him on his local nurseries, but usually a master gardeners have, or native plant societies have local nurseries, and they don't use those kind of pesticides. So if you do some research on your native plant chapter, like through CNPS, also on Cowscape, they have a list of nurseries also that sell the native plants that are neonic free. Hopefully the Pollinator Posse will have a list pretty soon, but I like Annie's is one of my favorite places in the world to work with. Like I said, Oaktown Natives, East Bay Wilds Nursery. He does not spray anything but fish emulsion, which if you're going to plant Dutchman's pipe, the Aristolochia for the pipevine swallowtail, he's one of the best propagators of pipevine, and he always has good pipevine to sell. And he says the trick to get your plant to grow is fish emulsion.
Okay, so another question, and maybe this should be our last, it's 8:07, unless people just want to hang out, but I don't want to press you, Tora.
I have some time if people want to
Okay.
stick around.
Martin wanted to know about which is a great question, planting at night for pollinators, or what to plant for nighttime pollinators, bats and other, like lots of moths that are only out at night.
The cacti, there's a lot of native cacti that the bats are the pollinators for. There's the Datura, the Sphinx moth uses, oh man, that's a good question. I'm not an expert in the night blooming ones, but again, the cowscape, you stumped me there, Martin.
I know that is a good question. I hadn't thought about that.
It's like Datura. I know that there's, the Brugmansias and stuff like that are night blooming, and Daturas are night blooming, and the cacti is usually what we focus on. There's several native cacti, from the Mojave that the bats, that's their main thing.
But they're all over the Sierra, so I don't know what they're.
The bats up here are mostly, insect eating bats that we usually deal with. And I like to plant, I just like to make sure we're putting up bat houses and that we're creating good habitat for bats to sleep in during the day and hide out. A lot of them like to use attics, and people will get all freaked out about that. But it's creating healthy, habitat for them to rest in. That's really important for the bats. Because, man, they eat like 600 insects an hour, and if you're in a mosquito area, you really want your bats. So, I encourage people to put up bat houses if you don't have barns or, places for them to nest.
Cool. I think, are there other questions? You guys can unmute yourselves and ask if there's.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute. Or you can raise your hand if you have a question. Unless you've turned off your video because we can't see you.
Okay, then that is.
Oh, Anathera. Allison answered. She's right. Anathera is another for the Sphinx moth. The evening primrose is another night blooming.
Right. Yeah, so I just want everybody to know that I'll put both many of the plants that Tora kind of threw out during the talk on the follow-up email. And when we get a link to the YouTube, I'll give you guys that, as well as I'm going to try and get a list together from this chat of the nurseries in the Bay Area. Sorry, you guys that are in other places, can't help you.
Martin Backhouse, I hope I said that right. He had another good question. Ordering seeds online actually is Pacific Coast Seeds has great wildflower seed mix, on Hedgerow Farms in Winters has great, they've been working with Xerces now. We use a lot for our seed balls. Is their Central California wildflower mix is the one that you see a lot of the photos that I had. The Lupin and the Clarkia is in that mix. They're fabulous and they germinate so well. Also Larner's seeds, they don't use neonics. They don't, because that's another one, is that people are coating the seeds with neonics. So make sure your seeds, I think, is it Theodore Payne or Thomas Payne? I know Theodore Payne is another one for like you down there in San Diego, Bruce, to get seeds from. So no, it's definitely a go. Do seeds. It's very affordable. Hedgerow is one of my favorite, like I said, Larner's, and Pacific Seed, they actually merged for shipping and picking up seed is in Tracy now. If you order seed from Hedgerow, you actually pick it up in Tracy at Pacific Seed. So they're working closely together. They have a great Bay Area erosion control mix for pollinators, but they do have a great mixes that are already pre-mixed for you that you can put for pollinators.
So we were saying in the chat, I was asking because I'm in Santa Cruz, and
okay.
I'm hearing that between 5 to 10 miles of the coast, you don't want to plant milkweed. Do you still want to plant it for other pollinators, or does it not grow well here, or what? Where does
There's that $1 million question. This is
what do I plant?
that is, they're starting to rethink that because of the numbers. If you're in Santa Cruz and you're not near an overwintering site, man, I don't want to answer this question.
Well, I mean, the reason they're telling you not to plant near the overwintering sites is there's concern that the milkweed will pull the monarchs out of diapause too early. So that's the reasoning, that if there's milkweed around, they'll begin breeding before the weather is ideal for them to do that. They're, like Tora said, with everything changing now and so few of them in the overwintering sites, we're not sure what's going on there. But the point is you want nectar plants. So if they need food, they have something. And the nectar plants are more generalized. Anybody, the bees and the butterflies share those. So they really want you to focus on nectar plants if you're close, particularly if you're close to an overwintering site.
If I'm in SoCal, so on the far other side from Santa Cruz, I'm less of a concern than someone like right next to natural bridges.
Right now, actually, though, but the bigger overwintering sites are actually like Pismo Beach and south of Santa Cruz now. So, but none of them had more than 100 in their overwintering sites. So I would stay away from making milkweed your ultimate plant, and really plant things that are blooming in the winter, like the Verbena Telemina that I was talking about, the Tajitis, Limoni, the Mexican, because you have a temperate climate, you have, the Cape Mallow, all of these 365 days of the year nectar, because if the monarchs do come near you, you want them to have enough nectar to get through the winter so they can lay that first generation of eggs. And if you're outside of 5 miles from the littoral ocean, then you can plant the milkweed, but just make sure you stick to the native milkweed so that it's not encouraging things to come out of diapause and lay eggs too early. There is an issue. I mean, we're gonna have a webinar pretty soon. Elizabeth will help us, and it'll talk just about monarchs and the milkweed and this controversy, because it can hijack a webinar, just this conversation.
How do I
and
get the link
people
for
want
that?
to know. So
Yeah.
we are working on coming up with a webinar very, very soon. We're working with Xerces Society very close, but please, if you are a monarch person, Terry created this fabulous survey. And this year I'm telling people, because the numbers have crashed, that it's actually a year for observation and less about trying to make drastic changes. And then we need you to fill out the survey so we can get all this information back to the researchers, because there was unprecedented year-round breeding in the Bay Area this year. And that's never been seen before. So all the researchers are everyone's stumped and doesn't have answers. So that's really, when you see people arguing about the milkweed, nobody has the answers. So don't get caught up. And the way I am talking about it is that if we get caught up on the decisiveness and the division of the conversation, then we're not helping the monarchs. So please just plant pollinator plants. Plant milkweed if you can. If you're not in that right near an overwintering site, the more milkweed we can plant. I don't want to get caught up in these conversations on which kind. I just want people to plant. I'm not gonna, because otherwise we're just stuck in these conversations, arguing about things instead of actually being proactive. So plant pollinator plants, get the plants in the ground, make sure they don't have pesticides on them, because that's really the critical and the tragic part. Is that Xerces did a study of milkweed last year, of milkweed in state parks, in people's backyards, even employees in the Xerces Society's backyard, of milkweed all up and down California. And they found 69 different pesticides in the milkweeds, even in state parks. I'm talking about pesticides like termiticides. And that's a critical, think about how much that's affecting the monarchs as they are getting born on this milkweed, just saturated with these different pesticides we're using in our landscapes. So they're battling that. So if we, as a community, fight this pesticide use, plant the plants that are going to give the pollinators nectar and pollen, that's the best we can do, and not get caught up in these arguments, because I feel like that's, you see it on the national stage too, these arguments that people get caught up in. Let's just plant plants and let's just help the monarchs, the pollinators.
I think one of the great things is that there's a lot of stuff we don't know, and because of climate change especially,
Right.
Things are shifting. And also, as Tora and I were talking about before we started, urbanization also, and the heat island effect that increases with more and more cement, which is what's happening as we infill all the cities. I know infill is good for people, but it's not necessarily good for our ecosystems. And so so much is about observation. And if you all use iNaturalist, that's a great tool for observation. I keep track of my garden through iNaturalist, what's here when. I don't have to keep notes. iNaturalist tells me everything. I can look and see, when did the monarch show up last year? When did I see my first Anise Swallowtail last year? When did I see my first Fritillary last year? And then I also know what's blooming when. And even, iNaturalist doesn't have much respect for planted plants, I guess. I put them in there anyway because they're host plants. And so I want to know when something's blooming, even if the iNaturalist community doesn't take planted plants that seriously. They're definitely hosts. So I think Tora's point of observing and seeing what we see is really important. Like our crows impacting, the influx of crows impacting other songbirds. We don't know. We've got to start paying attention. So
Right.
many things we just don't know the answer to. And as stuff is shifting, and I think Tora's point of not getting too stuck in, like I used to freak out every time somebody told me that they had, like I found out I had tropical milkweed planted. Freaked out. Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. And then, this next milkweed and that next milkweed, get the milkweed, cut it back if it's not native milkweed. But, just we're trying not to be as strict. Native, not native. Is it hosting something? That's important. So
You'll see too that, I've had almost 40, well now 40 years of landscaping and dealing with native plant societies. And I love the native plant societies, but they're so rigid about what was historically there, planted before. And it's evolution, it's evolving, and things are changing, and there's nothing rigid about nature, nothing. And so to be that rigid on things like in Oakland, when I was landscaping, there's nothing native about a concrete city, and to plant forest plants in the middle of a heat island effect. I fought with them all the time, and they'd want to plant red buds on the street. And it's then, they didn't listen to me, and we planted little red buds, and the underside of their leaves were sunburnt. They couldn't survive. And so I always think of the plant itself. Would that plant want to live there? No, it wants to live in a forest, and where we have heat island effect, we should be planting mesquite trees from the desert. So, thinking more about nature and how it's evolving, and most of the entomologists say everything is moving north because of climate change. So, when I talk about Tithonia, it's from North Mexico, and this used to be Mexico. So, and my big thing I say, and sometimes I get slapped around for it, but that plants and butterflies don't have borders. I'm sorry that if it's from North Mexico, I don't see a problem with planting it here. But I get screamed at a lot for saying those things, but that's really how I feel in my heart. It's not to be so rigid about the historical plantings. If you're in an urban setting, if you're in an open space, near open space, don't plant the milkweed that is a heavy reseeder, because it might get loose in the open space. That's what you got to think about. Like Physocarpa, that I tell people, please don't plant Physocarpa. It recedes so much that it's even coming up in cracks. That's going to be our next Scotch broom. So the milkweed that's Cape, the family jewels, this balloon plant, that one, don't plant that. That is in the Bay Area or in Southern California. It is out of control now. So we need to get away from things like that when you notice it's a heavy reseeder and can cause an issue. And just to be more common sense about what we're doing. But just plant, the more you plant, and to thank you for what you guys are doing. Thank you for wanting to listen and to caring about pollinators. Terry and I answer the emails on the Pollinator Posse. If you're into monarchs, please fill out her survey. It's a critical, iNaturalist is great, but it doesn't ask those other nuanced questions that we need right now for research on the monarchs. And also, if you want to be part of the Pipevine Swallowtail project or any of our other projects we're doing right now, feel free to contact us. Like I said, thank you for what you're doing, and go pollinators. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. You'll hear more from us. You can always subscribe to Pollinator Posse, also Wholly H2O. We don't send out very many. We only really send out newsletters when there are events coming up that we want y'all to get to.
Terry, someone's asking where that they can find the survey.
Yeah, I was trying to break in on that. The survey's linked on our website and also pinned at the top of our Facebook page.
It's a group, not a, it's a Facebook group.
I'm sorry, Facebook group, which you have to join, but we're the ones who approve you. So the concept is it's an ongoing survey. We're looking for people who are willing to report their observations on a monthly basis, but also we're also looking for one-time observations. You're out and about, you see monarchs, just pop it in there. And there's a lot of questions, but you only need to answer the ones that are relevant. If you just saw a monarch flying by, then you just go in and say you saw one adult. If you have more information, you can fill it in to us. If you notice what plant it's on, if you are rearing monarchs and you want to be part of letting us track that, it's all in that same survey. So, and we'll be providing, in addition to providing this data that we need, I mean, previously all the counting of monarchs and observation was done when they were in the overwintering sites. It was very easy at Thanksgiving and Christmas to look at them, or in the winter in Mexico. Now they're all over everywhere. They're not in the overwintering sites, so we need a network of reporters. So if you can do it, if you know if people can do it, we've got a Girl Scout troop that's doing it now as part of their citizen science badge, which is delightful. You'll get some perks. We'll do some small group conversation where we'll go into more of the details about what's happening. I've read way more research lately than I ever did in grad school, trying to track down the information and stay on top of things and share that with the people who are participating. So just go to the webpage. Right at the top, it says, help us with the monarchs, and it'll take you to an explanation and a link.
So I want to give out another little shout out to the Gardens at Lake Merritt and some of our posse volunteers. I see Mary Mortimer is on this. If you want to get hands-on volunteer in pollinator gardens, you can volunteer at the Gardens at Lake Merritt in our pollinator gardens. Terry's been going down and doing some pollinator training hands-on. We have a little outreach, a little mini museum that she'll do, and she trains the volunteers. And I see Lauren is on this. She's one of the volunteers that take care of the bee hotel and the Airbnb there. And we always need more volunteers to help with the pollinator. That's the home of the Pollinator Posse. And we have quite large pollinator gardens there that need to be, worked on. And so you can contact Mary at, is that GLM? Mary, can you unmute yourself? Is it GLM volunteer at Gmail?
She just put it in the chat.
Oh, she just put it in the chat. Okay, yeah, volunteer at fglm@gmail.com. You can contact her. Right now, the garden is closed on the weekends, but we volunteer on the weekends. So if you want to actually hang out in the garden on the weekends at Lake Merritt, you can do it by volunteering. And I see
We're there
huh?
Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 2, most weekends.
And so we could use some more help, and we need to put in new, we do need to restock the Airbnb. And I would love it if Emil would like want to be part of this native bee observation and nesting site and signage for so I see him on here. So
Yeah, Emil definitely.
Emil,
involved
he's
in
like
it.
a powerhouse native bee dude. Like maybe we can do a webinar with you too soon with some of your
We did a
photos.
webinar with Emil, and it's on the Insect Sciences Museum of California's YouTube page. It was awesome about native bees, the
Yeah,
basics on native bees. It was awesome presentation. So I
we
really
want to
encourage people.
do some signage on site there that would lead people to where, because they go to the bee hotel because it's so large and they all have questions. So getting better signage where people can go to like find these webinars and stuff would be great. So we would love to work with you, Emil, about getting more native bee awareness, because that's my dream, is that
Sure.
everybody knows some native bees, because nobody right now can name them. So so thank you.
Yeah, Emil is my go-to person. I mean, now everybody, poor Emil, on Twitter and Facebook, he's identifying bees all the time. And it's always the same 3 bees that we're looking at.
I don't mind. That's all right.
It's pretty awesome.
I hope you enjoyed some of the photos I had today in my slideshow.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Emil to say which each of the bee was, but anyway. You guys, I'm sorry, I really gotta pee. So I gotta go. And I wanna, Tora, thank you so much for stepping in and
Thank you.
doing this. It was beautiful and really so many comments about how people are inspired. And I also want to thank Terry for being here and co-hosting the meeting. And just in general, thanking you too for, I'm going to try not to cry, for everything that you have done for the ecosystems, not just here in Oakland,
you.
but reverberating out, and how much you care and how much you volunteer your knowledge and time to all of us for this. So I'm really happy we can donate at least a little bit of money to you from this seminar. So thank you so much for being here, and for everybody else from coming. And you'll hear from us with, oh good, appreciate replacing the ivy, do it. Okay, y'all, thanks for coming.
Thanks. Contact us if you need. Have a good night.